Have you ever wondered what the Rochester Main Street Bridge looked like prior to 1967 and the Urban Renewal Program? Then join us as Geoffrey Zeiner looks at the history of the Main Street Bridge on this episode of our Sunday Stroll Through History program.
The following is a presentation from the Greece Historical Society.
Sunday Strolls Through History from the Greece Historical Society are sponsored by
members of the Greece Historical Society and by the sponsors of advertisements in the newsletter.
Crossing the Main Street Bridge, a Gonechester presentation presented by Geoffrey Zeiner, recorded April 13th, 2025 at 2 p.m. at the Greece Historical Society.
Well, I don't see anybody coming in. So I was concerned, I was just telling him his Facebook event said there was 12 coming and 120 interested in coming, which means some of them were. So we were very concerned that it was maybe we had too much of too small a venue. Well, Geoffrey is a sixth generation Rochesterian. Great-great-grandfather came here in 1868. Mine came in 1865. So married at St. Joseph's Church. And, they were friends. But he started a Facebook blog called Gonechester, and as far as I can see, about November of 2023. I discovered him, it took me a while, it took me till October. You were doing a story about a pedestrian bridge. Yes. And I used to use that. Who writes a story of the history of a pedestrian bridge? In November of that year, the Landmark Society gave him a special recognition for all the research he did. Phenomenal research on various subjects. So in January of this year, the Pittsburgh Library was going to host his very first ever talk on one of the subjects. And there was, about 20 people there maybe? And I seem to know about half of them too. Anyway.
They said correct.
And so I said, I knew he had this story. I said, would you like to come out to Greece and do it? Sure. Meanwhile, he's got another talk at Pittsburgh. And how many do you have scheduled now?
At least a half dozen, possibly more by then. I've lost track.
So, please welcome everything.
Right, well, as we covered, I don't have any history accreditations really of any kind. My background's in art history, but I am a Rochesterian. I love history, I'm curious about it, and I like to dig into things, find out a little bit more about, like, esoteric little bits of just kind of like what people experience in our city. And Gonechester is all about a blog that's all about things that were in history that are gone now.
I'll start off with this slide because these are the bridges people always compare the old Main Street Bridge to. Two other famous bridges that were built upon, the Old London Bridge in London and the Ponte Vecchio Bridge in Florence. The Old London Bridge was completed in the year 1209, with a chapel in the middle in honor of the martyred Samuel Becket. Other houses would follow, and by the late 14th century, there were as many as 140 houses on the bridge. Unlike the Main Street Bridge, buildings along the Old London Bridge cross-linked with one another over the roadway, forming a tunnel of buildings. The current Ponte Vecchio Bridge has spanned the River Arno since approximately 1339. It has held an array of shops ever since. This was not uncommon for bridges in Florence, but the Ponte Vecchio was, unfortunately, the only one of Florence's bridges to escape bombing during the Second World War.
Don't know why that's doing formatting. Hopefully that doesn't continue. Well, the very first bridge across the Genesee River in the Rochester area was constructed in 1812 out of wood. And the site was traditionally a ford where people would just walk across the river where the water was low. This illustration shows the bridge during its construction, with the eastern side built, still to be connected to the western bank of the Genesee. Since the eastern bank was higher in elevation than the western, the bridge would ramp down to the lower west bank. Later iterations of the bridge would lessen the grade, so they could diminish the obstacle of Main Street Hill. Okay. After a while, the first bridge grew decrepit. There were places where boards were fully out of place and the river was visible below. Elisha Johnson was contracted to build a new bridge, starting in 1824, which was completed in 1827. The public market was built upon the north side of the bridge, right here. Due to the presence of impassable rapids at the bridge's crossing, the Genesee was considered non-navigable, so boats couldn't go up and down south of that point. And the village wasn't obligated to keep the waterway clear for boat traffic, so they could just build buildings on there if they wanted to, and they did. Lots of buildings. Let's see, the market buildings, now erecting on the north side of the middle bridge, consist of an open platform adjoining the bridge, 20 feet, for a vegetable market, and then there's a raised platform that was about at the same height as the Buffalo Main Street sidewalk, and there was more market in there. There's a covered meat market building, and this is, this market was famously the reason Carroll Street was renamed State Street. The original market design was 60 feet out into the river, for which the village purchased the rights from Charles Carroll. When the actual market was built, it came out to 80 feet into the river, and Carroll sued for the 20-foot encroachment of his rights. Paying out for the extra rights put a huge dent in the village budget, and the trustees vindictively resolved that Carroll Street would be thereafter known as State Street. So Carroll Street became State Street because they were angry at him, but now the city is removing Carroll's name from everything because of his involvement with slavery, so it seems like we saved some time in the present. Let's see, the above map shows the bridge as it appeared in 1832. No, I went back. Sorry, the bridges are, the buttons are the wrong way around. Let me figure out. There. The above map shows the bridge as it appeared in 1832. After this, there would be a fire in 1834 and a flood in 1835. So red is the main bridge, also known as the Market Bridge. And the market is on its north side, marked in green. Farmers' wagons would gather around the fountain that was in between Aqueduct Street and the western end of the bridge. Let's see, one can see the market buildings in this etching from 1836. The previous year, the market buildings actually fell off the bridge entirely into the river, with some shops like the Butcher's Market of Edward Champagne and Gilman Leavitt even plummeting over the falls, which apparently didn't even destroy it. Like, it just fell into the river and over the falls and was still able to be salvaged, which I think is impressive construction for a meat market. Yeah, you can see the Market House of Champagne and Leavitt at the west corner of Buffalo Street was precipitated into the river by the falling of the string pieces. Such was it reached the falls and commenced its terrible descent, but little shattered. Amazing. That's fascinating. One very interesting building that I'm very excited by is the Globe building. There's not a lot of evidence for it outside of text. You don't see pictures of it very often. So by 1830, practically the whole north side of the bridge was occupied by buildings. Those on the bridge proper were exclusively of wood construction, but one of the most prominent stone structures in the entire village was built at its eastern edge and rested partly upon the bridge. This was the Globe building, a 4-story structure built in 1827 and equipped with water wheels under the building. It was devoted to small manufacturing shops, factories. Allegedly built by William Lawton, a carpenter from Massachusetts, The Globe Building was one of the very first tall stone buildings in Rochester. At the time of its construction, only the turret of the Reynolds Arcade was as tall. The Globe Building had somewhere between 4 and 6 stories above bridge level, with basements below, and was outfitted with water wheels to draw power from the river and a raceway flume below the structure. And this is just a hat stand that had its manufacturing in the Globe Building. Globe Building, numerous small industries crowded into the water-powered building. A monument carver, famous clockmaker Abijah Gould, shoe last makers, wood turners, rat trap makers, comb makers, milliners, and the printers of the Rochester Observer and the Rochester Gem and Ladies Amulet. Multiple fires struck the building. After the first fire on January 25th, 1834, the main street facing side of the Globe Building was refaced in brick. The building was effectively divided into two by a division hall. In 1837, another fire ripped through the building. The damage from fire and flooding throughout the 30s was incredibly extensive. The structural damage to the piers of the bridge was so severe that a new bridge was required. The public market was moved to the west bank of the Genesee, fronting on Front Street, facing the foot of Market Street. Here you can see this is a view from Main Street. Main Street's over there, Buffalo Street's over there, so east and west. And you can see the aqueduct where that was constructed. The buildings on the north side were erected almost immediately after the bridge was done. They took the form of a row of one-story wooden structures filled primarily with clothing merchants. Main Street Bridge, 1846, was an irregular and somewhat picturesque structure. Its northern side, throughout its entire length, was occupied by a row of one-story wooden structures, which even then looked venerable and were occupied mostly by dealers in ready-made clothing. The plank sidewalk in front of these stores was some 2 feet lower than the planking, which formed the roadway, and I can well remember that, owing to the careless and informal way in which the planking was laid, one could see through many openings the water flowing beneath as he crossed the bridge. So already this new bridge has apparently planks missing or loose that you can see the water through, which just goes to show the construction. And here I'm just going through some of the clothing merchants and other merchants that had advertisements that show that they were on the bridge. So we have clothing merchants, Shelton and Co. were at number 9 Main Street Bridge. They did ready-made clothing and stuff like that. We have dry good merchants, number 1 Main Street on the bridge. Some more merchants that were on there, and there was a brush factory that operated out of the 3rd story of the Globe buildings. And finally, one thing I love finding is clues about colors in history. So according to these ads, for at least a few years, number 3 Main Street Bridge was painted red. A popular advertising tactic of this time was simply to paint the front of your business red and put red front in your ads. Look for the red fronts applied to this store on the bridge, but also one on Main Street, one on Front Street, and one on State Street in various decades. I think doubtless every major street probably had its red front at some point. Seems easy enough to do. The Main Street Bridge on the 1851 map and an 1855 drawing of the Main Street Bridge. Work on a stone bridge to replace the wooden one began in 1855, so right after the time of this drawing. to be completed 3 years later in 1858, despite numerous setbacks. A major flood in 1856 swept away the buildings on the north side of the bridge, along with the stone piers of the new replacement bridge. On the west end of the Main Street Bridge, at the corner of Front Street, was another very old building, property of wool merchant Aaron Erickson. It was constructed in 1858 on the lot known as the Old Market Lot, after the public market, which once dangled over the river there. You remember that a few slides ago. The property remained in the Erickson family for many decades. So you can see this is the 1851 map. You can see the name Erickson right here. Aaron Erickson right here on the corner of Front and in Main Street Bridge. The Erickson building would stand 2 years longer than its neighbors on the bridge, only coming down in 1967 with the clearing of Front Street. And here's some photographs that show the Erickson building. At one point it was the home of the Oyster Bay Hotel. It was actually the home of a lot of different hotels. They were fly-by-night operations. The 1860s was the first full decade of the stone Main Street Bridge's life. The north side quickly closed up with buildings. Here's an ad for a millinery and fancy goods shop that was on the north side of the bridge. Frederick Starr, highly influential in the development of the bridge at this time, was Frederick Starr, cabinet maker and Rochester's first piano builder. His factory was at Water Street in East Main, next to Liberty Street. He purchased lots along the south side of the bridge with the intent of eventually building a factory. But a stay was placed on building wooden buildings on the bridge. So Starr advocated for strengthening the piers on the bridge to allow for his factory to be built out of stone. But before he could do that, the bridge was destroyed. So that was the old wooden bridge, but he maintained the rights when they built the new stone bridge. So he still had rights along the south side of the bridge, which he sold to Okampa and other interests that were building along the south side of the bridge. It's an article about him selling to A. Mosley lots number 1 and 2 on the south side of Main Street Bridge. Okampa's. Edmund Okampa, a men's clothier, began selling clothes at number 10 Main Street Bridge in 1861. Eventually, he constructed a prominent building along the south side of the bridge. Seemingly architecturally inspired by the Second Empire style, the 4-story building was capped with a mansard roof and an oculus dormer. Oculus dormer windows. Note the central faux tower. That wasn't really a tower, it was just a little bit of roof with a tiny extension behind it. The highly visible Okampa sign on the building south, facing the river, would remain a signature part of the bridge's aesthetic until its destruction in 1965. The Okampa building would take on the Okampa building would take on numerous important roles throughout its history. Rochester's YMCA began in a room in its attics around 1877, as did the first Bell Telephone Exchange in 1879. Edmund's son, Charles Herbert Okampa, was an avid collector of antiquities. These are a couple of examples of ancient artifacts he bequeathed to the University of Rochester and Memorial Art Gallery upon his death. One from Greece and one from Egypt's Ptolemaic period. He had lots and lots of those. You can actually find the whole catalog of what he gave away, and it's dozens and dozens of items. The advertising board. Before there were buildings along the south side of Main Street Bridge, one of the unique features of the South Rail was a board placed for the posting of bulletins and advertisements. You can see it right here. There's some posters and stuff plastered all over it. And this thing was always getting blown over in windstorms, signs getting blown off of it and hitting people, scaring horses, breaking plate glass windows on storefronts. So that was a valuable contribution to the community. 1865 saw one of the most massive floods in history, Rochester's history. A lack of midwinter melt caused ice to build up all winter, which caused an unusually large freshet that spring. This tore the back walls off of buildings on the bridge, severely undermined buildings along the river, scourged Front Street down to the sewer pipes, and filled four-corner storefronts up to 5 feet deep. It took out much of the western end of the Main Street Bridge and caused so much damage to the banks that buildings at either end of the bridge were undermined. And on the bridge itself, the suspended basements of the new brick buildings were torn out, causing the collapse of many of the walls and upper stories. 3 men trying to save the goods in Hartwell's store on the western end of the Globe building narrowly escaped death when the floor suddenly collapsed into the river. Erickson's building, on the site of the old market, and the rest of the Globe building were left sagging dangerously. When the waters subsided, the aldermen were so appalled at these and under other scenes of devastation that they petitioned President Lincoln to exempt the city from further calls for the Civil War draft, because, as they said, they needed every man for repairs at home. But one thing that tells me is that the Globe building was still known as the Globe building by 1865, so that's cool for me. And this tells me that by 1880, it was known in the past as the Globe building, but no longer was. So sometime between 1865 and 1880, the Globe building stopped being known as the Globe building. So I don't know if it was still around, or if it was replaced by another building. History does not divulge that to me. Here's the interior and exterior shots of some collapsing buildings along the bridge. This would have been just a shop with its back wall falling off. Shops. River's right there. You can imagine how it was down there. Now it's up here. It's a lot of flooding. Here we can see the extensive damage done by the flood. This is a view looking east down Buffalo Street, or Main Street, towards the damaged Main Street Bridge. So the Main Street Bridge is here, looking at the south side and the north side. So you can see there's no buildings here. Buildings here are severely damaged. One building was actually wiped away entirely, the Barton Machine Tool Shop. The 1870s, during the 1870s, there were still mostly buildings along the north side of the bridge. On the south side, buildings were slowly beginning to encroach from either bank of the river. Here's a confectioner who had a shop on the Main Street Bridge. Just like to sprinkle those in there so I know what businesses were practicing. Buildings constructed along the south side of the Main Street Bridge around 1872 by Nehemiah and Emery W. Osborne and A. Mosley, who purchased some of those lots. They were brick trimmed in Freer stone. Freer was a manufactured artificial stone invented in 1868 in Chicago by George Freer, and produced locally at this time at a plant on Canal Street. So the bridge is still open to the river on part of the south side. Osborne and Mosley's blocks are to either side of that gap. So you can see there's still a gap in the south side of the bridge, and these would have been the new blocks that were built by Osborne and Mosley around the 1872 period. And here's an advertisement for a Freer artificial stone. Pentecost in Ocampo was a milling concern in the Central Mills run by John and James R. Pentecost in a partnership with the Ocampo brothers. So they had, they had a mill over here on the corner of the bridge on South Water Street and the south side of the Main Street Bridge. Nehemiah Osborne was a pioneer Rochesterian, a successful contractor, and a proprietor of the Osborne House Hotel, which was originally at St. Paul in Maine, where the Granite Building now stands. Later on South Avenue, where Broad Street cuts through today. Nehemiah and his son, Emery Wallace Osborne, constructed brick blocks enclosing the south side of the Main Street Bridge in 1876. The new business houses on the south side of Main Street Bridge make that locality very attractive. It is a big improvement. April 5th, 1876. This quaint drawing shows the view over the Main Street Bridge around 1877. The south is at left and the north at right. Oh, top hats. This is a cropped section of the large 1880 view of Rochester looking north. As for this extremely tall building on the northeast end of the bridge, I'm not certain, but that may be what used to be referred to as the Globe Building. Again, I have no idea if it lasted all the way to 1880, but this is about the spot where it would have been. Okay, here's something that I love. One charming item along the Main Street Bridge of the 1880s was the sign in front of Maxie Van Zant's coffee shop. It was a large metal tea kettle that actually steamed to entice passersby inside. The kettle hanged over the first floor of the old Ocampo building where Van Zant's shop sold coffee, tea, and spices. So yeah, I was excited when I saw the sign of the steaming tea kettle. This thing actually steamed. And so interestingly enough, an example of an actual steaming tea kettle sign is still extant in Boston. Originally hung in front of the Oriental Tea Co. on Court Street, now it is in front of Starbucks Coffee at the corner of Court Street and Tremont, near Boston City Hall, where you can see it in this photograph. And they had a whole party around this thing, where they tried to see how much capacity it could hold. And people were gathered around watching them just pouring buckets of water into this thing until it was full. But the exciting part was before they did that, there was like 18 kids inside of it. And they all came out. Like, just, people didn't know they were in there. So 18 kids coming one after another. And it was big news. Big fun news. So that brings us to the 1888 flat map and the end of the 1880s. This is kind of poorly composited because they didn't really match up very well, but I tried to stick them together so you could see generally what it looked like. They like to cut the maps apart right at the bridge, which made my job very hard. So we begin the gay 90s with an 1890 photograph of the south side of the bridge. The right image I couldn't find a date for, so I just stuck it here for ambiance. So I don't know exactly when that's from. Here's an 1893 view of the Main Street Bridge framed by the arch of the Andrews Street Bridge. So you can see the Main Street Bridge, arch of the Andrews Street Bridge, and all these people looking in their bowlers. So charming. Here we have the buildings on the north side of the bridge as of 1892, fur factory, some other shops. There's a restaurant. Could have gone into every single one of these, but that would take a lot of time. So this is the same, but showing the south side of the bridge. So this would be the open pod building here. And you go over here, you have the Democratic Chronicle building, which I will get to soon. Let's see, the second prominent sign on the river-facing south side of the bridge, next to the open pod sign, is that of the Rochester Dental Manufacturing Co. This company manufactured all sorts of dental implements, from drill bits to bellows to braces to chairs. The company was a continuance of David and Layden after Layden's retirement in 1886. But its logo would prove to outlive the business by quite a while, because the company failed in 1897. More photos. There's just lots of detritus like to collect under the bridge. They were constantly having to shove logs and stuff. There's log jams all the way through the 1830s, after the 1930s. I don't know how they didn't solve that problem earlier. Even with the deepening of the channel, just constant wood. I don't know where it was all coming from. Yeah, so what else? So another prominent sign on the Oakham Pub building on the south side of the bridge was Joseph Engel, a furrier. The sign above the door was a figure of a standing black bear clinging to a branch. You can see here, it'll look like that. Joseph Engel fine furs can be seen on the sill band above the second story. Engel the furrier is also painted up near the roof, visible from both east and west. And open. Sorry. At the extreme east of the Main Street Bridge's south side, on the corner of South Water Street, were the headquarters of the Post-Express newspaper. The Post-Express building was torn down in the summer of 1896 and replaced with the Security Trust building. Let's see, this is the Post-Express building. Post-Express building is to the left here with the clock. That's a nice clock. There's the Security Trust building that replaced that building into the corner of Main Street and South Water. By 1950, the Security Trust Bank has encroached into adjacent buildings on Main Street and South Water, so all the way here to here. A much larger building at that time, which I failed to put. I'm sure it's in some other ones. Looking west across the bridge, note the Oakham Pause sign and the Engel Furrier sign. And that brings us finally to the 1900s. So much history before even the 1900s. Here's the bridge as it was shown in the 1900 black map. The Oakham Pub building, the Post Express, Security Trust Bureau. All of these familiar names are starting to appear. This is a view circa 1903. And that would be the east. The view, this above view is from 1904, looking west across the bridge. You can see the National Hotels over there on the far left, with the Oakham Pub building. The Oakham Pub sign is a very good landmark. As you can see it in pretty much every one of these pictures. Here's another nice shot from 1904 that was on a postcard. And it gives you some sense of the colors. I think this is one of the first times that we're actually seeing tint, like color tint in a photograph. And the buildings are a lot different looking than you would think in black and white. They look a little neater when you couldn't see the color differences. Still very pretty. 1905, another shot with the south side of the bridge from the street side, the open pot building, the very top of the Elwood building. Here, you can see the printing shop, the Democrat and Chronicle. The lovely painting of Main Street Bridge by Colin Captain Cooper, 1908. I love this painting. Every time I go to see it, it's not on display somehow, but hopefully it will be next time I go.
Is it at the Memorial?
It's at the Memorial Archival, yeah. Oh yeah. So beautiful. I just love the mark making on this. Let's see. Here's another postcard showing the Main Street Bridge looking east from the top of the library building. Here's a cute little drawing from 1910. And it shows the bridge and the river. So here's the north side of the bridge as it appears in the 1911 Sanborn map. For many years, Marshall A. Zimmerman and wife Mary Catherine Zimmerman, along with son Howard Zimmerman, ran a candy store at number 86 East Main Street. Just pointed out right here, Candy Kitchen. They opened their location on the bridge in 1882 and closed it in 1913. The company as a whole closed in 1928. And here's the south side of the bridge from the 1911 Sanborn map. We have Democrat Chronicle building, Post Express, all of those. Let's see, another prominent tenant of the open pot buildings was the H.P. Brewster Company, a tobacconist and confectioner. The firm was founded 75 years before them. I probably forgot to do that. Do some math real quick. He operated a wholesale and retail business at 77 Main Street East on the bridge. In 1923, the company moved into the 6-story building at 41 South Water Street and did business there for 34 years. Here's a shot of the 1913 flood. Taking a look. That's the south side of the bridge. You can see the open pot building just down there. And this is in front of the iron-fronted buildings that are now the bank at 39 East Main Street. I have a whole other entry about that if you want to look at the entry Main Street iron fronts on Gonechester. That and several other things that I've covered today have their own posts. The steaming tea kettle also has its complete own post. So if that intrigued you or any of these other things intrigued you, you might be able to get a lot more detail than you ever wanted. Here's a picture of a drawing that Albert R. Stone took, and an actual drawing donated, well, he gave me the image, he gave me the original, by Douglas Fisher. And it's a drawing by Walter Henry Cassidy, as is this, and he did some nice sketches in graphite of the Main Street Bridge, getting a lot of the details really nicely done. 1917 Albert R. Stone photo was taken from Great Street, looking east across the bridge. Great Street, the bridge. Some lovely hats. Like, what happened? The 1918 flat map showing the Main Street Bridge. The Malta Hall. The Knights of Malta fraternity made their hall in the open pot building during this time. In 1922, they caused a massive controversy by having a speaker from the KKK. Their neighbors on the bridge were multiple newspapers that gave them relentless negative attention to that, which must have just been really fun. Just love the idea of a bridge full of newspapermen. Here is another drawing, another photograph of the south side of the bridge, and here you can see a short-lived little billboard that was for Orange Blossom cigars. And these little guys silhouette smoking orange blossom cigars. And this is the orange blossom cigar of E. Maker and Sons in Rochester, New York. That didn't last very long. The next year, photo, there is no billboard anymore. So I guess they only had a 1-year lease on that. That brings us to the 1920s with an image of the Genesee River choked in ice chunks on the south side of the Main Street Bridge. Most visitors and even many locals were unaware that the Main Street Bridge was a bridge. As the Genesee River wasn't visible from the street, one might assume other streets ran behind the buildings on the bridge. One man found out the hard way this was not the case in 1920, when he pilfered numerous watches and other gold articles from Glasser's jewelry store, number 86 East Main Street. When a patrolman called out to him, the burglar ran and leapt out of a rear door into the river. His drowned body was later recovered from the river, complete with the stolen wares in his waterlogged pockets. 1922 was the year the Democrat and Chronicle would refurbish their building on the Main Street Bridge. Before we get to that, let's rewind. The Democrat and Chronicle coalesced from two earlier newspapers, the Daily Democrat and the Chronicle. The presses of the Democrat and Chronicle were located in a building fronting on Grave Street. The rest of the building was built over the river, parallel to the bridge. That'd be just about where this rectangle is now. You can see in this engraving, that's what the building looked like, and it was known as the Rochester Printing Company, the printing arm of the Democrat Chronicle. On Halloween of 1893, the Democrat and Chronicle moved into their new building on the Main Street Bridge, connected to the old Rochester Printing Company building by elevator and walkway. The building's facade was a twin-peaked Queen Anne style with two sets of 3-story bow windows. You can see there's the architect's drawing of the new old building, and here's how it connected on the bridge to the printing company behind it. It's the Genesee River. The red arrow points to the Oakenpaw building. The yellow arrow points to the Democrat and Chronicle building prior to its 1922 renovation. So this is what the Democrat and Chronicle building looked like on the East Main Bridge before. Here we go, the front and back of the Democrat and Chronicle building. So there's the front over there. You can see the bow windows, and you can see it from the back. You can see the peaks of the Queen Anne style facade. So that gives you your bearings a little bit. Here's a shot of the D&C building renovation in progress during the summer of 1922. So the old facade has been taken off. The new facade is being installed. That was going to be white granite. So in 1922, the Democrat and Chronicle building underwent a massive overhaul. The front along the Main Street Bridge was trimmed out in white granite. The bridge is seen in the 1926 plat map. The red arrow points to number 86, Glasser's Jewelers, where that burglar jumped to his death. So you can envision that more clearly. This is an aerial from 1929, shot from the south, shot from the north. So you can see what the bridge actually looked like from 100 feet in the air. Calling a few photos. The date on this one isn't definite, but it looks from vehicles to be late 20s or early 30s. This is the north side of the Main Street Bridge, taken from the Commerce Building at Main and South Avenue. You can see the shoe store of Pearl Maxfield Van Deventer selling Florsheim's shoes, a Chicago brand. Detail. Here's a 1928 view across the bridge from the Water Street intersection. And you can see this would have been the Union Press building. This building had a Victrola radio store in it at the time. Very nice. Let's see. We entered the 1930s with a cute pencil drawing by Max Furnican Jr. of West Allis, Wisconsin, who traveled through Rochester in 1931 and composed this sketch of the Main Street Bridge. Here's the bridge as it appeared on the 1935 plat map, and I pointed out what I pointed out earlier, the Bonventure Shoe Company selling floor-shine shoes. It's right there. There's a couple of new signs on the southern face of the bridge. Goodyear Coats has replaced their old sign with a new one. Bubba's Signs has painted a sign, which is actually more visible on that slide. Put that note to me. Yep, there we go. Bubba's Signs. Bubba's. Let's see. On the north side of the bridge, a business opened at number 83 East Main Street. Royal Uniform Corps sold regulation U.S. military uniforms, as well as other uniforms. They painted their logo on the north side of the bridge. You can see it there. Royal Uniform Corps. And so they were selling military uniforms during the war, and I guess cowboy outfits afterward. Good. The 40s was a decade of fires on the Main Street Bridge. Major fires occurred in 1940, 1941, and 1947, with a few minor ones interspersed. Several buildings were damaged, and a couple on the north side had to be destroyed completely. Here's a picture of them tearing down ruins from a fire. The above shots are of fire damage on the north side of the Main Street Bridge. Note the large gap east of the Erickson building. A discussion that was had many times before was renewed, whether to be rid of the buildings on the Main Street Bridge. On the con side, the buildings were fire traps and somewhat of an eyesore. On the pro side, the buildings blocked the icy winds that funneled down the river and created a seamless connection between the east and west sides of the business district. And now that we don't have buildings, we can see the benefit of both of those things. Here's a fire that ruined several buildings in 1947. It swept the 4-story brick building at 92 to 98 Main Street. And so this was Wonders Jewelers, 82 to 84 East Main Street. They had to have one of the stories of their building removed from fire damage, and this one had to be torn down completely, number 74 at 78 East Main Street. We enter the mid-20th century with a view of the north side of the Main Street Bridge. Having a bit more color information makes it clear what a hectic jumble the buildings really were. Black, white, brick, stone, and siding, all pasted together, chock-a-block, without concern for aesthetic, which to me has a sort of charm lacking in design structure. That brings us to the 1950 Sanborn map, and here is, as seen in the north side of the bridge, red indicates the brick buildings and cinder block buildings that replaced the one destroyed in the 1940 fire. That same fire also damaged the Wonders Jewelers building directly to the east, necessitating the removal of the top floors. And here we have the south side of the bridge. Not much news there. This photograph is looking east across the bridge from near Front Street. Note the Sibley building at the center. Here's the Okampa building at the right with the security trust bank next to it. The swinging 1960s kicks off with this 1960 watercolor sketch of the Main Street Bridge by artist Ralph Avery. An expressive piece. I especially like how the painting captures the seagulls we learn about. Seagulls were apparently a big draw to people who worked on the bridge, and they liked to spend their lunch breaks on balconies, tossing scraps to the birds and watching them fight. Enchanted age. There's a bridge in there somewhere. This 1963 view looking east on Main Street shows how buildings conceal any sight of the bridge, which begins roughly where the banking sign sits atop the tall white building. Bridge. You can't see it. You can't tell. The north side of the Main Street Bridge in the early 1960s. The Erickson building can be seen where the red arrow points. The green arrow is Wanderers Jewelers. Between them, one can see the buildings that were replaced after 1940. They have a newer style of geometric windows set into a tiled facade. See, kind of hexagonal windows, round windows, tile facade. Very new era for the 40s. The above is a cropped and zoomed 1965 aerial, focusing on the Main Street Bridge during its last year of having buildings on it. As it was being destroyed, Henry Cleveland reminisced that the Democrat and Chronicle building on the bridge had been almost as familiar to him as his own home. Here we see the motto upon the building's top: with or without offense, to friends or foes, I sketch your world exactly how as it goes. Excerpted from Lord Byron's Don Juan. A series of ironwork arches that had been built to hold up buildings were now visible for the first time in a century. You can see all those little arches of metal built between stone piers. These arches supported the cellars of the buildings above, while allowing water to pass through. Makes a lot more sense. You see those buildings, like, what? How? How did they? Where's the? Here, the long stone piers are visible. The arches would have spanned these piers, and together they would have supported the buildings constructed on top of them. How many times can I say the same thing? I'm so sorry. Here's a photograph, courtesy of Bill Sowers. You can see the long piers, and here without their arches. The stone remnants of the piers can still be seen from the Main Street Bridge, and in the background, buildings are still standing on Water Street. Let's see, this is the same area with the piers destroyed in a photo from Bill Sowers. The buildings along Water Street have now been demolished, and beyond Liberty Street, the old Edwards department store building is in the process of being torn down. The Main Street Bridge was stripped down to the individual stones, which were expertly brought back to square by masons and replaced. In the photo above left, nothing but the keystones of the arches remain in place. At right, a mason works on squaring a stone. What glimpses? What? In 1987, Albert Paley was selected to design a sculptural metal railing for the Main Street Bridge. Here's a sketch of concept art for the railing. That was a photo from Albert Paley's studio of himself in the plaid and his crew assembling the railing. And another photo of the railing in place with its original color. Some students from RIT covered the Paley railings in 1996 to protest cuts in art programs at the school. Of course, the latest change, which took place in 2022, was painting the railing an intensely saturated shade of blue. A decision I can't say I agree with. And that actually brings us to the end of my presentation. So I guess it was still an hour. Sorry.
Does anybody have any questions, comments?
We could do a Q&A or
Yeah, Bill back there.
More architectural. It's like, how wide was the bridge with all the houses and stuff? I know what's the bridge, 100 feet wide now or something?
It must have been, it must have been much wider.
And were those piers put in, were they added on? You know, you laid the bridge and then they were added on as they built buildings onto it?
That is an interesting question. I imagine every time that they had to construct a building, they probably did add on new arches below that because there were places where there were not buildings originally, so those wouldn't have had rails. They must have added those on later with the construction of the new. So I guess that was probably just their means of building on the side of the bridge, yes.
Just an observation. If you go to Europe today, you can walk or see bridges that were built by the Romans, which testifies to their engineering skill.
Yes.
But what was with the Americans? Why?
Cheap, fast. That's kind of our motto, even back then.
Lots of wood.
Well, even
Boy,
the
we
Broad
lots
Street
of-
Bridge that we have today, the bottom part was built in 1840. And in 1920, they built the top part. And in 1970, they completely ripped up the top part and rebuilt it. But the bottom part is still the 1840.
Yeah, the stone parts seem to hold up pretty well. It's everything on top of that tends to be pretty shoddy. Such as rails, such as boards for people to walk on without falling into the river. Seems like an important infrastructure. But they didn't care.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I have been trying to think back on what the buildings were like, and we used to go to, down Front Street in the 40s, 50s, every Saturday. But so I wasn't, of course, because we're thinking about that, but I didn't even know about the river like anybody else. But I'm wondering what was there facing the river. We always went to the little like meat markets on the east side of Front Street.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yes.
were there tall buildings that were blocking it even there?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
How tall were those? Well,
But
more than a
myriad.
story.
They were usually industrial buildings built to take advantage of the water power on the river. So I believe one of them was the original fee building. I think they had a second one that they moved to, and then there was a few other, kind of like your brick industrial buildings of that period. You can see some of them in some of the. Oh, this is so long. You guys sat through this. I can't believe it.
Fascinating.
They have a long back.
I'm trying to get to that shot. It's nice.
What was that?
Rattlesnake Deep, wasn't he on Water Street?
He was on Front Street.
He's on the
Yeah.
street.
Front Street, yeah.
You said what street?
What?
West Front.
Between
West
Mills,
Front
right?
Street.
Yeah, it was a
I didn't
building
know
that
about that.
it fronted on Mill, it fronted on Mill and backed on Front.
Say that 3 times fast.
Back front.
This is my class at the very beginning.
Oh my goodness. I thought this was going to be easier to pull up. I'm sorry.
Can you tell me
Oh.
again? Oh,
There we go. Well, it looks like at this point there was only the one still on the. Oh, this is Water Street, not Front Street. My apologies.
Back up a couple. Yeah, good shot.
Yeah, I know I have one.
There's Front Street.
Yeah, you can see Front Street is here. So yeah, you had buildings along here and along here.
so the Democrat and Chronicle building, remember that? On that, well, I didn't even know it was a bridge.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
You know,
Well,
so
I-
that one was the Gannett building.
I was telling a lady when coming in here, when I was young, my parents, and we lived in Greece, when they went downtown, they always went up St. Paul Street. But I assumed because of left-hand turns or whatever, they came back down State Street. And I remember as an 8-year-old being inquisitive enough, why did we only cross the river once?
Oh,
Yeah.
And, you know,
It's really tricky, you know?
yeah,
yeah.
no, never, so, I mean, that's an impressive building.
It really is, yeah. I don't remember exactly when they changed over to the building after that. But I think they were in there right up until 1965.
I would have been 65 at the time, period of time they were taking those buildings down. Up until then, people weren't aware that all of what was underneath it. But I wasn't living here at the time. But were the people that were living here, were they astonished at the time? Right, when they was taking place?
knows the difference.
That's when they took the buildings down.
Yeah.
Oh,
well, yeah.
That's what I
I
mean,
think
but that's the
it's-
first time most people knew.
Yeah,
And I was a
some
kid,
people really
and I
were.
remember being astonished that you could see a
Yeah, the
river,
water.
because not just on the bridge, but as you're talking about, there were buildings all along
Yeah,
the river.
water from-
For miles, you couldn't
I
see
just
the
picture
river.
how shocked to be at the first time the first building would come down.
Yeah,
Yeah.
oh, yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that whole area, and if you zoom in, if you go forward to one of the pictures of the Granite Building, like,
Now, did that move again to where it is now? Or what?
Sorry, the,
One with the eagles on the top, whatever that is?
What year was that one built, the one that was
this
right
is
before?
probably 1966. But I worked right here for 5 years.
I
It
see you
started
in
in
the window.
1966.
Yeah, you're waving,
I probably
waving,
did.
yeah.
And so the buildings had just come down, but urban renewal was just starting. So all along here,
this was,
this is actually the Burke Building. This is the Burke Building.
Oh, that's, oh,
And the
I-
people, when I worked here, there was the cafeteria. It was kind of funny because it was all your friends from the Burke Building. We moved to this building because the cafeteria moved into that building, and everybody that lived in that building. Of course, this is where Sibley's first started.
Oh.
yeah, that little.
So it was
Are you talking about Burke Jewelers?
no,
No.
it was this name of the building.
It was a department store before that, and I think one of the western half of the building ended up being in Edmund's location,
Mm.
and then I
The
think
Edwards
Burke
was right next to it.
and then Burke was the one right on the corner there.
And this is the old Lincoln Alliance building, when they took that down. This is the Commerce building, and then right next to it was and I have to sort of embarrassed to say my project was demolishing the Lincoln Alliance, the Commerce building and the Security Trust complex. So, that was right there, you know, so,
It would have happened anyway.
but that was when I worked for the city. But those 5 years watching downtown, of course, you didn't take a picture every 5 seconds like you do today. The things that I saw coming down was and
Well, I'm
by
glad
the
you
time
guys-
I left, the Holiday Inn had been built.
Oh, it was shots with the holiday. I missed it.
What did you just say about the Holiday Inn when it was built?
But
Well, that's
this is the site, this building here is the site of what became the Holiday Inn. So, before we leave, I would like everybody to sign in, please. And I didn't want to pass a hat, but there's a hat right by the door if you want to help him. If anybody knows how long it takes to put these programs together, it's you know, the research and the time is fantastic. So the hat is the hat by the door is for him if you choose. We do have a museum in the back if you haven't been there before. And a gift shop. There's a law about gift shops and museums.
Unfortunately,
And
there's no
you're
access
supposed to have to walk through the gift shop to get out.
Yeah.
You can do that.
Barlow's.
We do have an exhibit, we're just starting, it's not done. The exhibit is about the 1920s NFL, organization of the NFL, and our Rochester team that was in the NFL in 1923, the Rochester Jeffersons. So,
And lots of other stuff.
there's a lot, so you're welcome to stay.
Kathy would be glad to show you all of it.
Would appreciate you signing in. Okay?
Thank you so much.
And I want to say, I had over here, to thank Pat has put this online. We'll have it on our website, it's been live, and, but he will eventually set it up so that you know, your friends can see it.
One more.
I would say, I'd say the picture.
Those that would like to see other stories about other places or things that have disappeared from the Rochester area, you can follow Geoffrey Zeiner on his website at gonechester.com or by scanning the QR code on the screen in the lower left corner. Want to learn more from the Greece Historical Society and Museum? Then click that subscribe button. Hit that bell icon to get notified when there's new content coming from the Greece Historical Society. You can visit us on the web at GreeceHistoricalSociety.org. You can find us on Facebook at Greece Historical Society. And you can stop in at the Greece Historical Society at 595 Long Pond Road.